you guys so much for joining this first week one of our new Webflow workshop. This is a new thing that we have started. Initially, it was for the TZ Floxies members, but we also wanted to open it up to any Floxy member who is interested in kind of getting an introduction to Webflow. So this course is mainly targeted for beginners or like just people who don't have as much of experience using Webflow. But if you do have a bit more experience, you're still welcome to join, and hopefully there's something that you can gain from this. I don't have a fixed time or like schedule for how many sessions I'm planning on doing, but my initial outline was 3 months because I think that gives everyone enough time to build new skills and understand how to use the platform. And these are weekly sessions. So every Friday, we are going to be hosting these sessions, probably around the same time. And then as the months go by, I'm hoping that you guys can see your progress. Apologies if there's noise outside. I live in a very busy neighborhood. So just ping me if you cannot hear me at any point. Um, but yeah, so this is our, oh my God. I don't know if you guys can hear that. That is so loud. But week one, here's a couple of different things that we are kind of going over. So first, an overview of Webflow's capabilities. So what can you build in Webflow? We'll just kind of go over that and summarize it. And then number two is navigating the Webflow interface. So the designer, editor, and dashboard will go over those three key areas and the different functions that they have. And the third step is understanding the box model. So margin, padding, flexbox, grid. This third one is probably not something that we'll master in this one session, but we'll at least get a head start on understanding the box model and how it works because it's really essential for building in Webflow. But before I kind of dive into Webflow, I know we have quite a few people who signed up or who are here right now that aren't Floxy's members. Kind of heard about this session from a friend or from someone. So I wanted to briefly talk about Floxys is a global community for women in tech or in different creative industries, and members live essentially all over the world. So I am part of the Tanzania subgroup, but there's also Floxys members in Europe, in America, in Asia, etc. So it's a global group, and we really encourage just connecting, networking, and supporting other women around the globe in what they're doing. So I will quickly, I don't know how I can do this. Let me see. Okay. Let me switch to my other screen. Okay, there you go. Okay, so this is the Fluxy's website, which I will also drop in Gather as well. Hope I can do that. Let me see. And as I mentioned, it's a global community for women in tech, or even outside of tech, if you want to connect with other women. And we have the local TZ subgroup. So if you're not a member of that and you're interested in becoming a member, we'd really encourage that you join. We have a WhatsApp group, and we have sessions where we meet up every 2 weeks, co-working sessions on Sundays, where you can come connect with other women. We do some work together. If you have questions, you can ask, or if you just want to meet other people who are in a similar industry as you can join that. Outside of the local TZ group, we have the global group that you can join. Once you click onto the website, there's a join us button here. So you can click that, fill in a form, and join the global group, which I'd highly recommend because it's a great way to get to know more Floxies outside of just Tanzania. There's so many Floxies around the world, and so I'd really encourage doing that as well. So I've dropped the link for the website there if you want to join the global community. And if you want to join the local one and are based in Tanzania, just send me a message on WhatsApp or here if you can, and I will add you after today's session. So we will jump straight into what we're covering for today. Um, First, initially, we're going to be, as I mentioned, talking about Webflow, as a whole, an overview and what you can accomplish and do in Webflow specifically. So for anyone who is totally new to Webflow, I think this introduction is probably going to be super helpful in that aspect. So Webflow is, let me just make sure my screen is sharing. Webflow is an online website builder similar to WordPress or Wix or Squarespace, Framer, if you're familiar with any of those. It's a platform that allows you to build websites and do so without having any coding experience. Having an understanding of coding can be helpful, especially when it comes to certain terminology or certain ways you can like play around with websites. And obviously, with custom code, if you already understand how to code, that's super helpful. But you actually don't need any coding experience to build sites in Webflow. It's built in a way where you can build a site without any of that knowledge. And I think currently it's one of the premier platforms for building websites outside of WordPress and maybe Framer, I guess. um, Main reason being, at least from my experience, I don't haven't used all these other website builders before, but from my understanding, Webflow is much more custom in how you can make a website. So whatever your vision is in terms of how you want your website to look or how you want it to function, what animations you want to include, what interactions you want to include, you can do all of that in Webflow. Assuming you know how to do it, you can do it in Webflow. And a lot of these solutions, you don't even need custom code for it either. So that's what makes it a pretty popular tool, and it's been around for a very, very long time. So you can see here, there are like a ton of different examples of websites that other people have made in Webflow, and you can see how different they all are, which gives you a sense of just how much you can accomplish using this specific Webflow builder. Why I would recommend Webflow over other website builders is, well, personally, I'm used to Webflow. I mean, I'm a freelance Webflow developer, so this is what I use for work. But I find that number one, there's a huge community aspect to it, which can be really helpful if you are stuck or you want support. There are like so many voices online that can lend you that support, even outside of Floxy's. I think the Webflow community is probably my second favorite community online. So I like that aspect. Not every platform has that huge community following. And also, like I mentioned, creative output is really just dependent on you. Whatever idea you have, you can probably execute it in Webflow as long as you kind of know how to do it. And I also want to mention with stuff like ChatGPT and everything, it makes it super easy to even build out like very niche or very custom solutions because you can simply ask ChatGPT what you want it to build, and it can give you an answer. Obviously, it doesn't work all the time, but I found that it's made my work a lot easier when I'm trying to add in custom code solutions to what I'm doing. It's been super, super helpful. So maybe in a later session, we can actually go over how exactly to use ChatGPT effectively when you are trying to get it to help you build out some more custom code solutions. So outside of websites, you can also build more stuff in Webflow if you are interested down the line. So apps is one thing that is new. I think it came out, if not the year before, then 2 years before. So you can also build your own apps or integrate existing apps in Webflow. This is just to kind of make certain processes easier. So instead of having to open a different app externally and link it to Webflow, if you've kind of done something like that before, you know how tedious it can be. If you just install the app directly in your Webflow website, it makes that easier. So apps is something that you can look into in your own time if you want to. I don't think we'll cover it in this specific workshop series because it's pretty advanced, but that's an option. And then there are also libraries which are kind of like, I've never used them, but I think they are kind of like style guide libraries. So there are existing ones that you can download or purchase, and essentially just gives you full style guide layouts that you can add to your website. So that could be colors already identified, fonts already installed. I think some libraries also include like entire sections already created and made. So all of that you can then use, and then just copy it over into your own project. But I haven't used libraries before, so I can't totally speak to how it works, but it should be something like that. And then before I kind of talk about partners, there's also templates, which is similar to libraries. So people make templates in Webflow. You can also make your own templates in Webflow and sell them or allow other people to download them. And so those are like fully made websites in Webflow that you can then duplicate and add to your own projects, manipulate it however you want. So templates are cool. I haven't used them as much either, but there are also some really good ones, free ones especially, that you can check out. I think for someone who doesn't always want to build from scratch, templates are a very useful alternative to avoid that. And then certified partners is the other one I wanted to briefly mention. Essentially, one of your short term or even long term goals outside of maybe becoming a Webflow developer. I'm not sure what everyone's goals here are, but you can also become a Webflow expert partner, which basically identifies you as somebody with a certain level of Webflow experience. And sometimes that can help you get more clients, especially if you're working freelance. Just makes you stand out among other people within your country. So that's also something that you can look into if you want to pursue that down the line once you have more experience in Webflow. I don't know if they've changed the requirements up till now, but the last time when I did it, you only needed three projects, not client projects, even just any projects, and they check your actual code or layout, which is why we're going to try to go into as much detail as possible on how to build a Webflow to make sure that you are building things in the best way, because that's what they check. And then I think there are like a couple of exams you have to do, but not too difficult. So something you can also keep in mind down the line if you want to pursue that. And then Made in Webflow is the last thing I wanted to cover in this first segment, which is a really great page where you can get inspiration from other people who have built in Webflow before. But at the same time, it allows you to get certain, I don't know how to describe it, layouts or solutions that you can add to your own website. And we might cover this in a later session. But when you do open the Made in Webflow page, you can kind of get a sense of these are a couple of highlighted projects that people have shared on Webflow. So you can see them and view them. And for some of them, you can also clone them, which basically means however they've been made by this person, you can then clone it, duplicate it, add it to your own workspace, and then add it to your project. So I do that a lot for like certain sections that are I don't want to have to build from scratch. I don't need to purchase or download a full template, but I can just get like a small part. Like, for example, if I wanted to add this specific interaction to my website, I don't need to recreate that on my own, especially if I don't know how to. I can just clone this person's solution and then add it to my project. But we might cover that later, how exactly to do that to make sure it's as clear as possible. But just wanted to showcase that that's an option. So if you are ever looking for inspo or just cool little solutions that other people have created, you can check out the Made in Webflow page, and that should give you a lot of inspiration and a lot of ideas of stuff that you can build in Webflow. So we're gonna jump into the next part. Hopefully this was like a pretty thorough and somewhat um, interesting overview of Webflow and what you can create in Webflow. And so now I wanted to dive into navigating the Webflow interface, specifically three key areas: the designer, the editor, and the dashboard. However, if you do have any questions, guys, I'm gonna try and leave like I'll ask if people have questions after each section. So now that we're done with the first section, you can drop in the chat if you have a question. Otherwise, we will move forward to the next part. Okay, no questions. Great. And that was an intro, so I'm glad that was like pretty clear. So navigating the Webflow workspace or interface, I don't know if everyone already has an account in Webflow. Ideally you do, or if you don't have one, you can make one really quick right now. It shouldn't take you too long. But assuming you have one, once you have created your account and logged in, you're usually taken to your workspace, where it basically shows you everything you have already in Webflow. So this is my workspace. Obviously, I have a lot because I have a lot of things going on in Webflow. It's my job. And I have a lot of folders. But if you are new and you haven't really done anything, it might be empty or you might only have one project within it, which is fine. But just covering this is called your dashboard where all that information is displayed. And then on the left here, you have a couple of different tabs that you can navigate around. So if you're already a Webflow partner, there's like a partner hub tab where you can get more details to your progress as a Webflow partner. There's a client management tab, which is actually really new. I think it came out last week. A way of like billing clients, etc. So that's if you were freelancing in Webflow. There's also a tutorials tab, which I would highly recommend everyone checking out because Webflow has a lot of really good tutorials and videos when it comes to learning how to use Webflow. So you can check those out in your own time. And then there are like general settings, team plans, billing, integrations, templates, and libraries, etc. Most of these you might not necessarily need now because you're just, starting, or assuming most of you are just starting, but they're there if you ever need to. For example, if down the line you want to add a team member, you would navigate to this tab. If you wanted to change your plan, you would navigate to this tab. I think everyone is probably fine with the free plan. I think it limits you to two unhosted sites and maybe one hosted site. So that might be enough for now. But if you need to increase that, you can just change your plan here. And then these are the integrations and templates that I talked about earlier, which we won't cover today, but those can be located here as well. So this is your just general dashboard. If you wanted to create a new site, you'd click this button here and create the site. Or if you wanted to create a folder, you click this icon here. I have already created a folder for specifically this Webflow workshop. So that can be found here once I click into that folder, and I can have my website here. Before I click onto this specific page itself, I also want to just briefly highlight the other section on your dashboard that you will probably be using a lot, which is your settings. If it lets me actually do that, I don't know if it will. I might need to navigate from here. Okay, normally when you click these three icons, you can access more options other than share. One of those options being settings. I don't know why it's not appearing now, but you can also navigate to there from your designer, which is what I did really quickly. But once your settings are open for your project, so this is not your account settings, but your project settings, you can see you have more options here of things that you can manipulate for this specific project or this specific website. So I can change the name of my website. I can upload, a fave icon or web clip icon, which we will go over later what these are, what it means if you don't know. The time zone for my website, these are all general settings. And then you have your site access settings, which basically allows you to manipulate who can access this website. Right now it's just me, but if I wanted to add more people, I could, or if I wanted to add editors, I could, assuming, of course, certain things you can't do until you upgrade the plan. So, for example, I can't add editors until I upgrade my plan. Then we have publishing, which lets you change your domain. This is the web staging domain specifically. So you can update that, or if you scroll down here later on when we get to this stage, you also see how you can add your own custom domain. There are plans. So if you want to upgrade your plan, right now we're on starter, which is limited according to what they mentioned here. But if you wanted to upgrade it later, you can, etc. We won't go over all these tabs now because we don't actually have a need to. We haven't built anything, but this is where you would access all these different project specific settings. Now, if I close that and I clicked into this icon here of my project, you can see a button appears to open my site. And once my site is open, oh, my site is blank right now, so this is all I can see. But this is what I would have open. So the designer has a lot to it. I don't know if we can cover every single detail because I also want to dive into the box model in a minute, but I will cover all of the key features. And then as we continue on with these workshops, you'll familiarize yourself with everything else. Of course, feel free to ask questions. But this is called designer mode, which gives you full access to your Webflow project. You can design, you can customize, you can edit anything on designer mode. If you go to the top left here, you'll see that there's design mode and there's build mode. Build mode is similar to edit mode, or at least it used to be called edit mode. Webflow has had a lot of changes recently, but I think it's build mode is edit mode. And that basically limits how much access you have to the project. So if you had other people also working on the same project and certain people didn't need to have access to everything, they could play around with the project on build mode, which you can automatically see the difference. On design mode, I have a lot more icons here and tabs that I can click on. Whereas on design mode, I don't. Like, I'm very limited in what I can actually see and access. And this is what I also usually recommend for clients when they're trying to make edits in Webflow, to only use build mode because it prevents you from making any crazy changes on Webflow. You can only really edit like the text content, maybe certain images. A couple limited areas is are what you can play around with on build mode. Once we actually start building out things, it'll be easier to see what you can and can't edit. But build mode, I would say I highly recommend if you only, for example, wanted to edit CMS content, which we'll go over a bit later, or just change a couple of text or a couple of images. It's suitable for that. However, we're gonna focus on design mode because that is where we can build whatever we want, essentially. So it's the view mode that we want to work with. So within design mode, there are several tools, tabs, icons around your workspace, which can be very confusing. I will try and kind of go over the key ones. So starting with the top bar here, we have this toggle here, which I've already gone over, that has design and build mode. Right next to it, you have CMS, which is where you can create your CMS collections, which we'll cover in a future session. But CMS collections are what we use, for example, for blog posts or job postings, or I mean, you can use it for anything. But like I mentioned, we'll cover it in the future, but it is very useful way of collecting and gathering a lot of data in one easy to manage source. So that is CMS. And then I think somebody's audio is on. Sonali. No worries. Oh, Anna, what is the folder called Webflow Workouts? Yeah, that is, oh, that's a folder I made for, because I have so many websites, so I have to put them in folders. Sorry, I missed your question. I actually can't hear when a message comes in, so feel free to also unmute yourself and ask at any point. Um, but yeah, so we have our right next to CMS, we have Insights, which is a new thing fairly recently. You probably don't need to use this, but it gives you insights on your project. You have to pay. Obviously, this is not free, but we won't really be touching that. And then this is your preview icon. As you are building, you can actually preview how the page will look, how certain animations will work. You do that all in preview mode. So you can just toggle that on and off to preview and then go back to designing. In the middle here, you have this icon, which is for localization. If you were creating a website that needed multiple languages, this is where you'd go in to add more languages. I've actually never built a website with localization before, and it is probably a very advanced option. So we likely won't cover it in these sessions, but it is there. And Webflow has a lot of videos on how to use this, but you can find all those settings there. Then you have here, which is where you can access your pages. You can access your pages in two locations. This is one of them. So you click on that and it gives you a list of all the pages you have. We just have the home page for now. And then we have our utility pages, which are just pages Webflow gives to you because you probably might use them, like a password page in case you have any pages that are locked by password only. You can build out what that password page should look like, and a 404 page, which is needed in case there's a link on your site that's broken. It'll take people to this 404 page, so you can design how that looks. Then you have the settings icon next to the page icon, and this just means you're going to open the page settings for that page that you're on. So in this case, it would open my home page settings. Then you have here your breakpoints. So there are 4 default breakpoints that Webflow provides when you start a site. So desktop, tablet, mobile, landscape, and mobile portrait. And you can click onto any breakpoints to see how your site looks within that breakpoint. So the really great thing about Webflow is that as you build your site, you can start in desktop mode, and then later on you can go in and change and update how it looks like on smaller screen sizes to make sure that your website is responsive and it looks good on mobile in the same way that it looks good on a larger screen. If you want to exit out of this, for example, you can just click the exit X icon and it'll go away. Going back on the left, we have add elements, which allows you to add different elements in Webflow, which we'll do shortly. So there are sections, there are containers, there are div blocks. I mean, there's a lot. There's typography, media. It's a lot, it can be very overwhelming, but we're gonna try and cover like most of these. And once you get a hang of it, it shouldn't be too difficult. You can add elements or you can also add layouts. I haven't actually added layouts before, but this is what I mean by libraries. It kind of comes with pre-made templates that you can use to build out certain sections easier. So if I don't want to build out a navigation, for example, I can just click and drag this navigation to my site and then edit it that way. So you can do that. I do think it's helpful to understand how to build things first before you use templates so you always know how it works. So that's what we'll be doing. Then you have pages again. So this is another place that you can access your pages. You can see here, it also tells you if you don't have a specific kind of page. Like we don't have any static page templates, which we'll go over later. We don't have any CMS pages, which we know. We don't have any e-commerce pages either. And we don't have any user pages, but that's fine. But this just gives you an overview of all your different pages. And then this is your navigator, which is where all your layers will be. So as you add elements to your site, they will appear here and you can kind of navigate towards different elements through this navigator panel. You can also, a nifty trick, pin your navigator if you don't want it to go away when you are designing your site. So if I click on the site right now, for example, my navigator goes away. But sometimes I find when I'm building, I really need it to stay there because I'm always clicking through different elements. So you can actually pin it and that'll mean it'll never go away. And then you can unpin it. So that's just a recommendation for anyone. Below Navigator, we have our components. So probably do this in the next session, if not the one after. So as you create different elements, there's certain kinds of elements that you use many times, like your navigation bar or your footer. So you can make it into a component, which basically means as you use it on all your different pages, it'll stay the same, which means you don't have to go back and always edit every single version of it. So components are really useful and we'll make sure to cover that. These are your variables, which we'll also go over in the future. Basically allows you to add in your colors, your typography, your sizing. I normally use it for colors specifically, so you can add those in as variables, which basically means if I add, for example, blue as a variable, and later I want to change blue to green, I can just go into my variables and make that change and it'll change it throughout my whole website as opposed to going and having to manually change every single point where I used blue. Style selectors, these are just your classes, which we'll also cover later as you build out classes in Webflow, they'll appear here. And then this is your assets panel for like any images or documents or Lottie files. As you add them, they will all appear here. And then the last three we're probably not going to use, but like apps, which I've covered already, you can add in any apps to Webflow depending on what you want to do or use. And these are just additional integrations that I have because for my own work, but we won't go over those today. Last but not least, we have our settings panel, which is where you can access a couple of different settings. There's the search bar. This is actually if you add search to Webflow, which we maybe will cover. I don't know. I haven't actually used it that much. It's not exactly, it doesn't work exactly in the way you think it is, but you do need to upgrade your website to add a search function to Webflow. So basically, people can then search for something on your website and it'll take them to that solution. This one just lets you update your interface, which might be useful if you want your interface to be darker or brighter or default. You can add that here. And then the last part that I want to highlight is backups because this is pretty important, especially when you are building an actual project. Webflow automatically will save backups of your site frequently. However, if you want to manually save, you can always come in here and create a new backup. So you can make sure that in case of anything down the line and you need to go back to an older version of your site, you can do so directly from there. So this was a very, I mean, not so detailed, but I tried to cover a lot of the different key components of the designer, which is what we're mainly going to be using. Um, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and ask me. Otherwise, I will now move forward to actually building something in Webflow. And in our notes for today, we said that we're going to cover understanding the box model, which is a term you probably learn when you are learning how to develop or code, but it just includes understanding margin, understanding padding, flexbox, and grid which can be a lot, but I will try and cover as much as possible and leave time at the end for questions in case anyone doesn't understand any particular thing. But I don't think anyone has any questions at this point, so we will get started on understanding the box model. So in Webflow, how you position items is not drag and drop. Some other website builders like Framer, I think, actually I don't know if Framer is drag and drop. I'm trying to think. Maybe Squarespace is drag and drop. Some other website builders are drag and drop. So you can just drag. I can add an image on here, for example, and then just move it on the page and it'll move accordingly. Webflow doesn't work like that. You have to manually position your elements in order to get it to look the way you want it to look. And how you do that is by using stuff like margins, paddings, flex boxes, and grids. Those are kind of like your main building blocks for building out your Webflow elements. So if you have Webflow open on your laptop or screen, it might be helpful to follow along, but otherwise this is recorded anyway, so you can follow along afterwards. But I'm just gonna start out by adding a div block. So you can just go into add elements, this div block here, and then add it to your page and it'll appear. Well, it is there, but you can't see it because it doesn't have any customizations to it. So it's almost like it's not there. But if you open up your navigator, aka your layers panel, you will be able to see it. I'm also gonna pin my layers panel so it doesn't disappear. So you can see it's right here. It's called div block. Also, what is a div block? I don't know if people are curious about that, but I actually don't know how I would even describe it. It's kind of just like a block that you can manipulate and use to hold information, to display information. That's the best way to describe it. It's just called a div block. So like 90% of the containers that you use in Webflow will probably be div blocks. So that's what we're going to start with here. So now that I have my div block, I've clicked onto it. And if I go on the right here, we have our style settings and interactions panel. But for today, we're just going to be using the style panel, which has a lot of stuff to it. But going through each area, we have first of all layout, which dictates how our div block behaves. So is it a block, which it currently is right now? That's the default. Is it flex? Is it a grid? Or, there are a couple more options here, but these are the main ones used. And none basically means it's like it won't appear on your page. You can even see that there's an icon here to let you know that. Then we also have spacing, which has margin and padding to show you how you can space out your div block. We have size, we have position, we have typography, we have a lot. But because we're focusing more on understanding the box model, we'll be focusing on these two first sections here, which is layout and spacing. But to make sure you can actually see my div block, I am going to give it a color. I'll just make it black so you can actually see it. And I am going to, yeah, I think I'll just leave it. So clicking onto my div block, one of the main ways that you can space out your content in Webflow is using margins or padding. So margin is how far away your element is from its parent layer or from other elements around it on the top, left, right, and bottom. So for example, if I increase this to, and I'll actually give it a size so you can see it as well. So if I added 50 pixels specifically, you can see that it moves this box of mine down the page by 50 pixels. Similarly, if I added 50 pixels on the left, it does the same thing. It moves the box 50 pixels from the left. If my div block was in something else, or if there was something to the right of it, like here or here, and I added 50 pixels, it would do the same. It would move that element away. So if I hover this, you can probably see it more clearly. Why is it not appearing? But you can see that it has created this 50 pixel margin on the top, the left, the right, and the bottom of my block to space out this element from anything else on the page. So for example, if we had maybe 2 copies of this div block, I just copied it and pasted another version of it, you can see that it automatically appears below it and is spaced out because we have this 50-50 spacing implemented. So regardless of how many I'd add, they would always be spaced out 50-50 because I have this margin applied. I'm just going to undo all of that. So that's margin, spaces out elements on the outside is the best way to think of it. Now there's also padding, which is how you space out elements on the inside of your div block or on the inside of whatever element you have. I'm gonna add another div block, but put it, actually, I'll create a new div block and I will oops, give it 50 and I'll make this, I don't know, I'll make this white just so you can actually see it clearly. So this is just another div block I made to properly convey what padding means. So in our first div block that we made, if we were to add padding to it, so for example, let me make this 100, we can automatically see, and I'll actually remove the constraints for height. So it's not limited to just 100 pixels. But when we add 100 padding, and if you hover over the actual area, you can see what it means. It has created space from the top of the element, added 100 pixels of space so that this block or square we have inside is pushed down by 100 pixels. Similarly, if we, I'm going to remove also the width one. If we added padding on the left, it would do the same thing. So we can see that our box is now pushed 100 pixels below, but also it's pushed to the right 100 pixels because in our main div block, our main box, we've given that value of 100 pixels. If I did this on the bottom or also on the right, it would do the same thing. If it's hard to see just how it is, you can always hover over these to visualize it. But you can see that we have added that spacing on the top, the left, the bottom, and the right, those 100 pixels of space. So anything that you add in this div block, whether it's an image or another div block or a container or whatever it is, will always have that spacing on the edge of it because we've added it to our main div block. If I wanted to, for example, if I go back to my layouts, and let's say I wanted to add this nav bar template to this div block. So I can drag and drop that in here. I can remove this and you can I'm just going to give it a background because you can't see it. You can see that it's already automatically positioned in the center of this div block. Why? Because in our main div block, we have added padding of 100 pixels all around. If I were to remove these values and just, I don't want any padding, so I don't want any of the spacing on the inside, the easiest, a shortcut for doing this, by the way, is you can hold Option or Alt on your keyboard and then click it, and it'll just reset it. So if I wanted to reset all of these, you'll see that it's almost like our main parent block is gone because we have killed all the spacing. So whatever sizing this main block has, the section we've added within it will automatically take that sizing because we haven't added any padding space. But the more padding space we add, the more that the section will be pushed inside in order to take account of the padding we've added. Another shortcut also, I'm trying to be mindful when I use shortcuts, but when you click and drag, you can also increase or decrease your values. So I'll just undo this and go back here. So that was like a brief intro on margin and padding, and hopefully that makes sense. But if you have questions, feel free to let me know as well. Now, the div block as it is, like I mentioned, is just a block, but there are other layout modes that you can have for your div block. So for example, you can have flex or you can have grid, which are the other two I wanted to highlight. Flex essentially means, ooh, hard one, but it's a useful layout mode if you want to stack elements in a certain way. So for example, if I have this navigation and for whatever reason, I want, or actually other than this navigation, let me go back to my div block 2 instead. And let me give it 100% width. So let's say I wanted to have multiple instances of this orange or red div block, but I wanted them to be spaced out in a certain way. So let me see, 1, 2. I have 3 instances. So right now you can't really tell they, I mean, you can when you hover over it, you can see you have 3 of them, but the way that they're spaced out isn't clear. So with flex mode, you can easily add in those different spacings either vertically or horizontally. So for example, when you click flex, you have some more options here. Direction. So right now they are aligned vertically, like one, two, three. They're in one line horizontally, sorry. There's also an option of lining them up vertically, which means that they will come one on top of the other. One, two, three. If we go back, let's say we stay on vertically, it also tells you what alignment they have. So they're starting from the top of the container going down. We won't really play around with like the different other options right now, just because we're trying to cover the basics. However, you can dictate if you wanted to maybe start from the bottom, from the center. As you build more complicated layouts in Webflow, you can see how these different alignments work. But the key thing I wanted to highlight with Flex is once you have chosen a certain direction for your boxes, you can then add in a gap, which is just the spacing for it. So let's say I want each of these elements to have a spacing of 10 pixels. I've added that in, which means now each of these elements is spaced out from each other by 10 pixels. Much faster than going into each one of these elements and then adding 10 pixels margin to Flexbox makes it easier to just automatically space out your elements in an easy way. If I were to go back to laying out the elements horizontally, you can see it still has those 10 pixels of distance because we've added that gap, or we could make it 50 if we wanted. There's also this lock icon, which allows you, for example, this means 50 pixels left, right, and also top, bottom. But if you wanted, for example, to make it 10 pixels left, right, and then 50 pixels bottom, you can also do it that way, but we're just gonna keep it fixed. Like we want it 50 pixels on the left, right, and the top and bottom. So that's Flexbox. Really useful way of just making sure all your elements are in alignment. And I use it probably for 90% of how I align my stuff when I'm building. The other third layout type is grid, which we'll briefly cover. Similar to Flexbox, but grid is essentially a grid. If you're building a section that requires more of a grid format, I would recommend using a grid. So once you've activated this layout mode, you can see that there are more options that appear. For example, there's a grid option that lets you choose how many columns and rows you have. If you've used Excel before, I think it is very similar to that. So if I, for example, only wanted 3 columns, then I would just click number 3. So now I have 3 columns. If I wanted 4 columns or 5, you can see it already creates that space for me because it is expecting me to fill in these 2 additional columns here that have nothing in them right now. If you're having a hard time actually visualizing some of these, like, okay, where are my columns, where are my rows? You can actually click this settings button here, and that highlights those different columns and rows for you so you can see them more clearly. So I can see I have 5 columns. One FR just basically means, I don't remember what FR stands for, but basically means that they all have the same sizing to them. And then you don't really need to play around with this. And then you can see here you have 2 rows that are set to auto. Let's say we only wanted 3 grid columns and we only have 3 of them, so we don't need any rows. So I only have 3 columns and 1 row, so it displays my content accordingly. The other cool thing about grid is if you have a layout where one column has to be bigger than the other, you can also do that really easily. I think you can actually drag this on your screen directly to either increase or decrease the size of this panel, or you can manually come in here and type in a value. So the higher the value, the more space it'll take. Like if I make this 5, it'll take out a lot more space versus if I make it 0.5, it'll take up less space. So that's also something that you can do with grid mode. So grid mode is really useful for just building out very fixed kinds of layouts when you need to just add in information to them super quick. So that's an overview of like default block mode, flex mode, and grid mode. Um, I wanted, before I just delve into maybe what I would like you guys to practice in your own free time, I wanted to make sure there was enough time for questions or if there's anything you want me to clarify in more detail in this session. FR stands for fraction. Thank you, Anna. Oh my God, that's so, the more you know. I literally been using it and I had no idea. But does anyone have any questions over what we covered?
Yeah, Elsa, I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, so I have a lot of like e-commerce small businesses, and Shopify sometimes feels limited when it comes to design,
Mhm.
unless if you code, and it can
Yeah.
get very expensive. So I'm curious, like, have you ever built an e-commerce website on Webflow, and how robust is it?
I have built one e-commerce site in Webflow, and it was the full website except for actually the e-commerce functionality. And that was only because I used like the product pages and like how the checkout page looks, etc. I use all those different templates within Webflow, but the actual checkout process I couldn't use in Webflow because I don't know if it's changed now, but at the time they were only allowing Stripe, and in Tanzania we don't have that yet, so it didn't work for my local client. So I don't know to what extent Webflow works for e-commerce, including checkout, because I didn't use a native checkout functionality, but everything else was great. The product pages, the overall checkout page, the default checkout page, etc. All that was like pretty fine to build. I just had to use a different app for people to actually check out, because of those limitations. But I know quite a few people who do build out e-commerce sites in Webflow. The only concern I have is I don't know how many upgrades they've made to e-commerce functionality in Webflow. For example, I don't know if you know, they are phasing out, I think it's memberships or logic. So I don't know if come a point where they also phase out e-commerce, because as far as I know, they haven't made any updates to it in recent times. So that's the only thing I would be worried about, whether this is something that they will actually develop on, or if it's not really gonna improve or change down the line. I think about that too.
Okay, thank you so much.
No
Okay.
worries. Does anyone else have any other questions or
Yeah.
things you?
Oh,
Yep.
hi. Um, yeah, I guess coming from a design perspective, and
Hmm.
um, I'm used to like moving stuff around the page with the
Hmm.
mouse and
Yeah.
dragging and dropping. And I'm
Hmm.
wondering while watching this if I need to just kind of get my head around boxes and telling boxes where to go. I don't really, I'm trying to figure out because I want to be able to make like custom layouts with different alignments. Like I don't know how
Hmm.
to explain, like design, like nice designed alignments, like stuff you could do in print, or you could do in a poster but on a
Hmm.
website. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I totally get what you're saying. I think the box model is something that is hard to understand until you actually start practicing it. And so for me personally, when I was starting out, trying to copy existing, like you said, designs and remaking them in Webflow was a really useful way to understand, okay, when I do this, this happens, or when I do
Mm,
that, this happens. Because the theory can be really hard to like grasp until you actually try to apply it and play around with it. I find that it's easier to then understand, okay, how do I actually build out this layout using grid or using flex or using, div blocks in Webflow. But it is possible. There's so many cool layouts you can do in Webflow. It's just these are the building blocks. If you don't understand block, flex, and grid, it makes it very hard to then move beyond that point. So that's why I wanted to cover it today. But I
mm.
think this is probably the best way you will kind of get it to click in your head. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, no worries. I totally get where you're coming from because I also came from a design background, but it can be a lot in the beginning to like try and make sense in your head. And drag and drop sometimes can be a lot easier.
It feels
Um,
slower. It feels slower, but I think there's just a transition phase, and the kind of your head around
mhm.
this, is different. It's like a different it's like a different language. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It is like a different language in its entirety. But the good thing about it is that it is custom enough that once you get that understanding, you can build honestly anything you want.
Really.
Um, yeah, yeah, that's the
I
convenient
think it will
aspect.
just click eventually. It will just like it will start to make sense and click.
Yeah, the more you practice though is when it'll make sense. Because I think when you actually practice and you're trying to achieve a certain solution, it
Yeah.
forces you to have to understand, okay, how do I make this specific thing? and you kind of have to, make yourself figure that out.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Does anyone else have questions or concerns or, anything like that before we close things off for today? Okay, no. I'll take that as a no. Thank you guys so much. One of the key things I do want to do for these sessions, kind of like what I was mentioning to Anna, is practice. Because if you don't practice, it's going to be really hard to understand and find yourself keeping up with things. So I think in the registration email that you guys had signed up, I had mentioned that I wanted to provide practical. So this week's practical was to recreate a simple web page layout. I'm going to simplify that even more though. You can obviously be as advanced as you want to be, but I will be sending out a sample thing to build in Webflow. It's not going to be complicated, just so that you can play around with these different layout styles, understand how to use Webflow and the different functionalities. Yay, homework. Yeah, but it's optional. Like, don't think you have to do it. We all have busy lives, but if you have time and you want to, feel free to do so, but no pressure if not. So I'll send that out by email because I actually want to build something in Webflow specifically that you guys can replicate on your own. And yeah, if you have any questions though, between now and next week, you can always DM me on WhatsApp if you have my number on WhatsApp or on Floxy's Discord. I'm on there. On email, I don't know, I guess I'll share my email too if you want to reach out that way. You can reach out with questions. For the people in TZ, we are meeting up on Sunday as well, if you wanted to, at the MRI Hotel. So you can also join us there if you wanted to ask any questions in person. But otherwise, I think this will end today's session. Thank you guys so much. Hope to see you next week as well. I will send out a notice on Monday, the new registration link for next week with what we'll be covering then. But yes, thank you. Otherwise, hope you have a great evening, great day, wherever you are. I'll stick around for 5 minutes in case anyone needs anything. But thank you guys. No worries. Oh, and let me stop recording.